Hi, this is Shannon Perry of Audiotocracy Podcast Productions. As I record this, it's April 2022, which means it's Earth Month. In honor of Mother Earth and the living things that depend on her, this episode is about food and sustainability, but also where food intersects with justice and equity. It's about nutrition and health of people, but also the health of our soil and our water, and how indigenous practices can inform modern food production. Sofia Cavalleri is currently in the final stages of a joint PhD program, conducting research at the Stockholm Environment Institute in its Asia office, and at the Interdisciplinary Department of Environment, Development and Sustainability of Chulalongkorn University in Bangkok, Thailand. Her research focuses on how to reconnect local, rural communities of food producers with urban consumers in Bangkok by co-planning sustainable local food systems. Sofia's PhD research revolves around analyzing local food systems from environmental, socioeconomic, and health perspectives. How can rural areas earn income in addition to farming? How can urban residents change behavior to be more eco-friendly? How can we reconnect to regional traditions and cultural beliefs that are more in tune with the natural environment? Author, climate reality leader, and consultant Mary Purdy is a registered dietitian nutritionist and an integrative eco-dietitian. She has a master's degree from Bastyr University, where she is currently adjunct faculty. In clinical practice for over 13 years, Mary uses a personalized medicine and functional nutrition approach and is an expert in sustainable food systems. She lectures and has given hundreds of presentations online and at national health conferences on both clinical nutrition topics and the intersection of human health, sustainability in the food system, and climate change. Her focus is on strategies to change the ways in which the current industrial food and agriculture system drive climate change, harm the environment, and adversely affect human health, highlighting the disproportionate impact on BIPOC communities. To start things off, I asked my guests what defines a sustainable food system. Mary Purdy takes the question up first.
Well, gosh, there are a lot of different definitions of this, but when I think of sustainability in the food system, I don't just think of one thing. I think of what I basically talk about as four pillars or four dimensions. So a sustainable food system needs to include nutritional and human health, meaning that we need to create food that is nutritious and free from contamination, and that we consider things like antibiotic resistance. We make sure that the food is healthy for the person. We also go into the next pillar, which is we are preserving the environment. We are conserving natural resources. We are making sure we don't have too many greenhouse gases. We are making sure that we are not using too much water, not using too much energy. We have to go into the next pillar, which is the economic pillar, which is the food affordable for people? And are the people working in the food supply and the food chain and the farmers growing the food, are they being paid a fair wage? And then the last dimension is about cultural components. So is there gender equity in the food system? Is there racial equity? Are we honoring indigenous communities? Are we making sure that food people have the ability to grow their own food or food sovereignty? Is there animal welfare? Is there farm worker welfare? So sustainability is huge when we think about what it means. It goes way beyond just buying organic, right? Or other things that people think of. It really covers so much ground.
Mm-hmm, so to speak.
Nice.
Yes. It's all very interconnected. I think that's great to see, to sort of take that step back and see the network of food system. It affects everything and everyone. I mean, we all eat, but it goes far beyond that even. Sophia, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. So since I'm studying my PhD about sustainable food systems and sustainable local food systems in particular, when I defended my PhD proposal, I remember I received a lot of comments and critiques because I integrated the health component into it. And I said, okay, I'm looking at sustainable food systems, looking at four dimensions like environmental, social, economic, and health. And some professors had some reservations about this. They were like, but we're looking at sustainable development. And usually it's the three pillars of environment, society, and economics, And
Mm-hmm.
why health? But I thought it was so intuitive because it's food. So when we care about food, we care about healthy food. We care about nutritious food, and not only to end hunger, but also to sustainably really like feed the people in a healthy way, nutritionally rich foods. So it should be something that is embedded in the definition. So I'm very glad that Mary is here, because I think when we talk about sustainable food systems, usually we don't integrate that part of health and nutrition. In the sustainability arena, we only focus on like the food value chain, and then the nutrition aspect gets lost along the value chain. So you get these end products that are not really valuable at the end of the day. So yeah, I think it's very holistic, and maybe that's why for people it's so hard to access this concept of sustainable food systems, or it's so scary. But I think in a way it's also very intuitive. So if we go back to the basics in a very intuitive sense, we know that like the more you know the food that you're consuming, and the better it is. If it is organic, if it is made without pesticides and chemicals, it's better for you. And if you know the farmers directly, if you know how they produce food, so you just strip it down to very, very basic things and just read the labels. If you know the ingredients, it's better for you. If you don't know the ingredients, I don't know, maybe just inform yourself and do some research.
Yeah, and we have lost our connection to nature and the environment as humans, right? And so we forget that when the environment is healthy, it will ultimately produce food that is healthier for us. You know, when soil is healthy, when insects are thriving, when there's biodiversity, that is going to have a direct impact on the quality nutritional value of that food, which will have an impact on our microbiome status, on our immune status, all of the above. So yeah, I can't imagine these two things not being interconnected. They are so integral to each other.
How did human health or get divorced from this whole process? Like, how did that happen? It just seems so obvious that, you know, people are not going to be fully engaged members of society if they're not, you know, well fed. So how did that get divorced, do you think?
That's such a great question. From my perspective, what I see is that usually we look at like food security in terms of calories. So, okay, this food is calorie dense and that's good, but then is it really food and nutrition security? Are we really look at like the micronutrients that are in that kind of food? And I think that's the difference between sustainable food systems and just food systems that can provide food security, because if you focus on the quality of the food and like the micronutrients and the nutritional value, then you really go back, and as Mary said, you really link it to the land, to the soil, to how it was grown, and really this holistic concept of like what you are putting inside your body, and really the biocultural value of the food as well. So it's more holistic, I guess, and we're not using that anymore today. Like we don't value that aspect. We just value the calorie dense kind of foods. So yeah.
Yeah, and there was something called the Green Revolution back in the 1950s and 60s, where that came directly out of the idea that we weren't going to be able to feed our population, which is a similar fear now, which is completely unfounded in some ways, in terms of the type of food we want to feed our population. But so this Green Revolution, which sounds fabulous because you hear the word green, you think, oh, green, and you hear revolution, you're like, woohoo, revolution. But what it actually was the introduction of all of these intensive agrochemicals and ways of farming that would produce perhaps more food in the short term, but in the long term had implications both around the types of foods that were being created and the really terrible impact they had on the environment and are still having on the environment.
From the development perspective, usually people think that it's also good to focus on calorie dense foods, because then you can feed parts of the world that are struggling with hunger, with the problem of hunger, because we are very privileged and we maybe are not thinking directly about that problem, but it is there. But at the same time, we should really transition into a different kind of mindset and approach, and really support already existing indigenous practices and native foods, native food systems that are already there and have been there for generations. So those are very sustainable, and they've proven to be sustainable, and not only sustainable, but resilient, because they've been there through different political crises and socioeconomic difficulties and issues. So they really proven to be a constant kind of practice that can be adapted to the different situations. So I think the focus is just on localizing solutions as well, and looking at situated approaches in different communities and trying to scale them if they work, trying to take out the good practices and really revive them kind of in the modern world that usually is a bit more neoliberal maybe in its approach to food systems. So I think we can channel that into it.
Mary, you're nodding. What would you like to add?
Oh, I'm in complete concurrence with Sophia of this, again, this notion that we are trying to feed the world, and I'm putting that into quotes, when the world is fully capable of feeding itself in many areas, many regional, local, global communities that have been doing it for many, many years. And we have lost the ability to tap into the indigenous wisdom and indigenous knowledge in so many different countries and regions, where people have been saving seeds and have been using agroecological techniques, which are much I'm focused and soil building than our current agribusiness model. So yes, I'm in concurrence with Sophia, though she may be miles and miles away from me.
Can you give us an example of what an indigenous model might look like? I mean, there's a place here in Seattle that sells ladybugs, so you can go buy ladybugs to take care of your aphids, and I kind of think of that as being one of the more time tested and true ways of controlling pests. What examples can you give?
So I can only speak about Thailand because my experience is limited to this in terms of fieldwork and what I've seen. And I think small practices are very inspiring, any kind of small practice, because they're so scalable. So when I went to local communities to do my fieldwork, I really kind of rediscovered, and it was so fascinating to me because I've always lived in big cities. And then when I went to this local indigenous communities, they're preserving this indigenous knowledge. So they are custodians of a very wise inheritance that is linked to the land, but also to intangible kind of values. So the way that they are preserving the land is very much linked to their cultural beliefs. It goes hand in hand. And I think that's what is really fascinating to me, that they believe, for instance, of spirits in the forest, and this way of thinking about nature is very holistic. So they don't divide nature from other things. It's very embedded. So even when they think about food, it's more nature giving them back something, and they are so grateful that then they want to preserve nature. So I've seen a lot of community forests management initiatives that are done by the communities. So where the communities become basically environmental activists, and they really preserve the forest and the ecosystem services from, let's say, big agribusinesses or companies that are trying to really, with land concession or something, take advantage and exploit those kind of resources. So they really become, really activists, I would say, at the forefront to protect environmental assets. And I think it's the mindset. What I would like to emphasize and to give visibility to is not any particular type of practice, because they have many. They have different agroecological permaculture practices, but the thing that I think we could learn from them, the biggest thing is this mindset of being in sync with nature and really part of it in a very holistic, integrated way. I think it's very inspiring, and it gives me hope because otherwise it's a lot of apocalyptic news in terms of environmental issues nowadays.
I would say one of the places that I find the most hope, I was actually just on a call that was an Earth Vigil as we enter into Earth Month. And they were asking us what gives us hope. And for me, one of the things that gives me hope is Indigenous wisdom, is being able to connect to land. And I have found such great solace in the idea of seeing nature and the environment as kin, which I had never thought of before a year ago, but really seeing the trees and the flowers and the buds and the leaves as our brothers and sisters. It sounds a little out there perhaps for some people, but when we begin to think of nature and the environment as ourselves, as our family, you don't treat your family poorly.
Right.
You don't step on your family, right? You take care of your family, you preserve your family. And so that idea, that relationship with nature, being in relation, in kinship with nature, I think gives a profoundly different experience when we think about how we also grow our food. And we know that, and I love the ladybug, Shannon. That's absolutely a fantastic way of reducing pesticide use, but also things like a simple, really simple way that Indigenous communities here in the United States have been growing food is using the Three Sisters method. You know, the idea of growing beans and corns and squash all together because each one helps the other to grow. You know, the stalks of the corn are providing a place that the beans can grow around, and the leaves of the squash are going to act as mulch, and they're going to also they have these little tentacles that almost act as like little pesticides. So they're working together in concert. You know, that idea of diversification of crops that many Indigenous communities have been doing for centuries and thousands of years. So not just growing one thing, but knowing that these different varieties work in tandem with one another to help reduce pests, create more diversity of microorganisms that help to build the soil and keep the soil rich and nutrient dense. And, you know, there's a whole relationship going on underground that we often completely forget about or have no actually understanding of until we start learning about it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think there's a whole like sociolinguistic perspective we could talk about how we talk about nature. Are we conquering it? Are we dominating it? Are we in conflict with it? You know, this idea that we're constantly battling Mother Nature seems so out of sync with the kind of wisdom you're talking about, where if you're listening to nature and understanding it, then you know that this plant gives back to the soil what this plant has taken away. So it's a good idea to follow one with the other or plant them together or whatever. Yeah, I think that's just fascinating. And there's so much, you know, I realized the other day that I was thinking about calling my dad to ask him how to make compost. Like, what's the ratio of eggshells to coffee grounds? You know, like I don't even know that. And I feel like I really ought to.
I certainly don't know that either. And I wish that I did. I know there's courses online. I know there's videos online, but you know, I'd love to be more in touch with worms as well. I was in my garden the other day, trying to get rid of some weeds, and I was coming across all these worms, a few of whom I chopped the heads off of. I apologize to all the worms out there. But, you know, I was just thinking, thank you, worm. Thank you for doing whatever it is that you do. I know I have some understanding of you building the soil and pooping things out and eating other things and helping to make the soil even richer and darker and more beautiful. But so just that knowledge and that connection is, for me, is a wonderful part of this process.
Yeah. And we'll get to that connection soon, but we're talking about, you know, growing your own things and what that's like and how that changes your experiences with food. And I think I'm excited to get to that too. But so what are we currently doing that makes our food system not sustainable on any and all of the pillars that you brought up?
Okay. So many things. So where should I start? Mary, you can integrate if I forget something. So I think after COVID, it's been very easy to see that our current food systems are not sustainable, and they got disrupted very easily. And I think, for instance, in Thailand, I really got to see the importance of food systems after COVID, because some supermarkets were missing things, you know, like the import, export and everything. So there was this push towards more local food systems in a way, because you can be more self-reliant if you know where your food comes from, and you have direct access and control over the food that you purchase. So I think from my side, it's very interesting to see food security connected to like the city, and the right to food connected to the right of the city. For instance, if you live in the city and you are just an urban dweller, I'm guessing, you don't have direct access to the source of your food. So you don't really know how your food was produced. Mm-hmm. And this puts you in a place of uncertainty, confusion, and also weakness in a way. So I think if you want to establish a healthy, sustainable relationship with food, you should be in a position of power where you know a lot of information, as much as possible, hopefully, about your food, how it was produced, where, and this gives you the power to actually purchase what is really best for you or for the planet. Because what I've seen also with my research and the interviews that I did is that consumers nowadays are really not only disinformed, but they lack access to local rural communities. They've never been to a farm. Mm-hmm. They've never seen the roots, of the food that they consume. And this is wrong on so many levels, but it's just also sad because it really puts us in a place of not only disconnection, but yes, weakness, because I would say these food chains that we consider are very, very complex. It's not a direct exchange between producer and consumer. There are many, many actors along the food value chain, and this becomes very complex. And getting access to the kind of information that you would require to make an informed choice as a conscious consumer, it's becoming like this huge adventure nowadays. And people are asking me, so what should I buy at the supermarket? And I'm like, I have no idea. I mean, you need to go to the supermarket and really look for things. It's just very hard. So the best thing that happened in Bangkok, at least after COVID, a few farmers came to the city directly to sell more directly to consumers, and really cut these complex value chains, right? So even with social media, they really try to rebrand their own farm and their own rural communities as a rural business, which I think it's very inspiring, because then they cut the middleman, right? And they can sell directly to the consumers. Nice. And also give more visibility to their products and more transparency to the food that we produce, so that you can really see how it was produced, where you can go to the farm if you want. So a few farmers that I contacted started their own homestay or agritourism.
Nice. Oh, I love that. That's so great.
I think it's very inspiring, because then people come there to the agritourism, stay in the farm for a few days. They gain trust. They build this bond with the producer as well. And this kind of relation, I think it's more sustainable. This consumer-producer relation, it's more sustainable than just like, with a random brand or an agribusiness that you don't really know, like if they have some value. And also if your values align with the values of the farmer, and you really dive deeper into the practices that they use in the farm, you really support not only the farmer, but the ideas that they believe in, the permaculture, agroecology, whatever they're doing, you can really see the value of that. And with your money as a consumer, you're kind of, it's like a vote, right? It's like a political vote. You're supporting certain practices instead of others.
And it's a great opportunity for two-way conversations, right? Like, not only is the consumer being more educated about their food source, but they're also able to say, this is what I want. I want to make sure the animals are well taken care of. And I want to make sure that the workers on your farms are well paid. And that's awesome. I love that. Mary, you were going to say something?
Yeah, well, I love the idea of a more localized food system. I mean, I go to a farmer's market and I have conversations with my farmers. I ask them about their animals. I ask them about their growing practices. And that relationship really connects me to the food. But I want to go back as well to a much bigger picture, which is why is our food system unsustainable to begin with? And part of that begins with subsidies. Part of that begins with the policies that are being put into place that are allowing things to be grown that are ultimately unhealthy for us and unhealthy for the environment. So I'd say, it is unsustainable from the perspective of what we are actually growing. We are growing huge amounts of monocultures that are going into producing ultra processed, cheap, foods that are the very foods that are causing chronic diseases and having environmental impact that's negative. Number two, it's about how we're growing that food, the incredible amount of resources that we are using, water and land, massive amounts of land. And it's interesting that we're using so much land to actually grow crops to feed animals that will then feed us. It's a very inefficient system. I'm not saying we shouldn't be eating animals. There are cultures who really rely on that and people who rely on that, but the way that we're doing it is completely inefficient. And then again, using all those agrochemicals. And then number three is this idea of how far food travels. I mean, sometimes there is food that is grown here in the United States where we are, which is then transported over to China to be processed and packaged and then transported back to the United States to be sold. So that kind of inefficient system is just really unsustainable. And then there you have the packaging as well, right? We're having so many foods which are being driven again by marketing and agribusinesses and corporations and the food industry that want to put labels on foods or want to make fun, sexy packaging so that we think like, ooh, that looks kind of fun. Look at that crazy toucan on top of that thing with all those fun little rainbow colors. When we would do so much better of just buying food in its least processed form, in a whole form, without the use of all this packaging and paper, which is again, really detrimental.
Right. And when the soil is healthy, the fruits and vegetables are very vibrant colors. So can't we just cut out the sugar colors and go straight to the real ones?
Yeah, some purple carrots. Come on.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and food diversity is one of the things that's so interesting to me. When we were in Tahiti, we went to a banana market and literally saw, like, we get one, maybe two versions of bananas here at the supermarket. And it was incredible. I have never seen so many different kinds of bananas of all different sizes and shapes. And we're like, really, this is a banana? Are we sure? Like, and
we're losing that
like that. Yeah.
Right. I mean, I think Dole, or I can't remember all the banana companies, but and I'm sure in Thailand, there are a variety of different bananas as well, too, that we've never heard of and never seen. But because they are not being paid attention to, or because we're losing so much biodiversity, we're losing so many species of foods that were once keeping all of our ancestors alive and well and healthy.
Yeah. And when we asked about it, the reasoning was that these other bananas didn't travel as well. That's why the standard banana that we have now, it's very uniform in shape and size. It's easy to package and it's easy to ship.
Yeah. Once again, there's your argument for local food systems, right?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to the trust in the farmers, because those are not the normal or standard kind of foods that you find in the supermarket, right? But if you have a connection to a farmer and then you talk to the farmer and he educates you in a way about eco-learning, biocultural appropriate diets and ingredients, then you feel more confident about what you're consuming and why you're consuming it.
Oh, exactly. How many of us have been to the supermarket and picked up something and thought, I have never seen this before. It looks interesting. I'd like to eat it, but I have no idea what to do with it. So we put it back down and walk away from it, which is unfortunate, I think. But so tell me about food justice. What does it mean to have a just food system?
Okay, I think from my side, it goes back to your point, the point that you made before of the narrative as well, because we're telling stories with food systems. Food tells stories in a way, and I think the stories that we're telling now need to be decolonized and also less masculine in a sense. I read some articles that were really emphasizing on how the narrative is not including feminine voices, and it should be more feminist in how it advocates for a symbiotic approach with nature. So I think that was very interesting because even at the community level, when I look at the communities that I'm working with and the farmers, women have a lot of power on the ground in terms of economic decisions. They are managing these rice banks. They are managing the produce and the marketing. Their marketing skills are amazing. They brand their produce, so they have a lot of power on the ground. But then when we kind of level up and look at the meso level, what's happening in the region, what's happening at the national level, international level, a lot of power is in the hands of the same very privileged men, I would say, agribusinesses, neoliberal kind of organizations. So I think if we're thinking about more just food systems, then we are transitioning away from these kind of stories and narratives, and we're giving more visibility to the actors that are already part of the food system, but are not very visible nowadays.
Yeah, and I agree, and I see food justice as being very much tied to access to food and agency and governance over determining what foods you get to have and you have the right to have. So much of food access is determined by the organizations, businesses, agribusinesses, corporations that are driving the food industry, what is being planted, where food stores are, where grocery stores are or are not. And the ability for people to grow their own food or to eat the food that is appropriate for them, for their culture, for their needs. They don't have the opportunity to make that decision themselves. It's been taken away, or it's been determined, this is what we think you need because this is what we believe is healthy, or this is what we believe is appropriate. And so for me, it really is about giving people the right to grow their own food, to access the food that they think is healthy for them, and to have the governance and agency over their own food system and food ways.
How do we do that? Not to ask a large question or anything, but where do we start?
We start by having conversations like this. You know, I think a lot of people don't think about the fact that there are communities out there where we're talking about having conversations with your farmer. You know, I talk about going to the farmer's market. I am so damn lucky to be able to do that, to be able to talk to my farmer. There are people living in what are known as either food deserts, or they're also called food apartheid, where they don't have access to any healthy foods except a 7-Eleven or a convenience store, where, you know, they can get a Slim Jim and a 7-Up and maybe, you know, a 21-day-old apple that's been there, maybe, or like a cereal, you know. So, and that is not determined by that person's food choices, right? That's what they have access to. And so I think we often put the blame on community as well. You're not eating well, you're not, you know, you're overweight, or you're unhealthy. And it's not because that person has made bad decisions. It's because they only have access to certain types of foods. And that has to do very much with redlining and the marginalization of people living in communities where they are not being given the opportunity to feed themselves the foods that will ultimately make them healthy. Right.
And I think the subsidies that we have here are also problematic, right? Because we subsidize our farmers to such an extent that people farming in other countries can't break into this market very easily.
And it's so political, right? It's so political. It becomes a geopolitical dilemma or issue. But I like the fact that Mary pointed out about the food waste, because we need to consider food in the whole value chain, right? So from the production to the consumption to the food waste. And there is so much value stored also in the food waste component. If you start looking at it like potential compost, or I don't know, repurpose the food waste in another way, use it to make surplus food or whatever. So I think we really need to rethink about this and rebrand it in a way. But also, I think it's about access and control over food. Not only access, but also control. And the control part is the food sovereignty part. And what I see in Thailand is sometimes it's really political, because if you look at the land and who has control over the land, it becomes this land concession issue. And the players that are involved in it are the private sector and the public sector, and a few NGOs that can support the local community, a few national parks that can play this role of political mediator between the community on the ground and other national actors. But then it's really tough for local communities to advocate and play their role of environmental activists when their voices are not being heard in the international arena. So I think, as Mary said, we need to give visibility to those voices with conversations, with podcasts, with communication outputs, with books, with stories, and tell the stories that really matter.
Yeah, and there's a great quote from Fannie Lou Hamer, who is a civil rights activist, who says, if you give a hungry man or a hungry person food, they will eat it. But if you give them land, they will grow their own food, right? And I think one of the great things that we can be doing, whether we are in a position of privilege or just somebody who wants to do something and is determined to make it happen, we can give people land. We can get community gardens, urban farms. There are so many urban farms in places like Atlanta and Detroit, and even here in the Seattle area as well, where people are growing food in, whether it's a church backyard or a school backyard. I mean, those things are happening, and we just need to enable them to happen even more.
I was just seeing a story not too long ago about an empty lot that had been, they were going to develop it, and then the neighborhood sort of reclaimed it and just said, no, we're going to turn it into a community garden. I just think that's so wonderful. People learning how to grow their own food, and talk about food security. If you know that you can grow your own, that's like the ultimate food security, right? To have the knowledge and the space and the access to be able to do it yourself.
Yeah, and this is going to become more and more necessary, I think, as the climate crisis, worsens. We're going to need to be growing our own food, and so having the ability and educating everybody out there, when possible, if possible, how to grow something is going to be actually it's quite urgent at this point.
Right. I agree. So, what do you say to the person who says, "But I like grapes, and I live in Seattle, and we can't grow." Or I like bananas, or I like kiwi, whatever, right? What do you say to that person who says, but I love these things that have to come from somewhere else? What's the argument?
I get it. I am not here to talk to people about their personal choices as much as I am to talk about systemic changes, because I think behavior change does, especially on a massive scale, does not happen by shaming and blaming anybody. So, I mean, right. I get it. I like chocolate too, right? I mean, people in Seattle love coffee, and those are two crops that are slowly, maybe going to be off the radar at some point because of how they're grown and the impact that climate change is having on them. So I get it. And if you want to have grapes, okay. And make sure that we are also doing everything we can in our power to eat in a way that is more sustainable. So maybe there are certain things on the plate that we say, this is a non-negotiable. I have banana in my smoothie almost, 4 times a week. Right. So I have not given that up. Am I a bad person as a result? Well, one could argue maybe I am, but I think, again, the onus should not be on the consumer. We have to take the blame off the individual and make it a much, much bigger picture of policymakers and politicians and people who are working in these large corporations, people who are making plastic, not the people who are not who are buying the plastic. The blame should not be on them. It should be on the people who are making the plastic to begin with. And so it might be about shifting that conversation a little bit.
Perfect.
Yeah. I think from my perspective, I've been reading this book, Thinking Fast and Slow. I don't know if you read it, and it's about behavioral change. It's very inspiring because it really tries to understand how your brain works and how to kind of hack it in a way. Yes. By yourself. So it's kind of crazy, but you can really think about the environment and your surroundings in a very strategic way. For example, if you want to go to the gym more, you just put your yoga mat in front of the door, next to the door, so you remember. And you do the same thing with the food. So if you want to be more sustainable, you try to force yourself in a way, making the sustainable option easier.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to reduce plastic, you use more tote bags, you put them everywhere in your dorm room or whatever, in your kitchen. So before going out, you just grab one. And if you go to the farmer's market, you kind of try to make it a habit, right?
Mm-hmm.
So every Sunday, you know that there is a farmer's market, you just go there and see. And maybe you don't buy anything, but you just look around, you talk to a few farmers, you start having conversations, and then you get to know, okay, oh, grapes. Oh, you don't have grapes. Oh, how so? Why? Tell me more. Oh, they don't grow here. Oh, I didn't know. So you kind of force yourself to get educated and get this information more and more. And I think the more you get information and the more this information kind of drives you towards the sustainable choice very organically. You don't, it doesn't become too forced once you're already on the path.
I'm also a big fan of positive messaging, like what you were just saying about going to the farmer's market. When we start getting people excited about the foods that grow locally, like, wow, I never even heard of this vegetable before. I actually went to the farmer's market the other day and I found a vegetable that I had never seen before. I said to the person, what the heck is this? He said, it's called kellet. And I said, what in God's name is that? And he said, I didn't say that actually. I was very excited about it. It was much more positive. But, he said it was a mixture between kale and Brussels sprouts that is this species that grows naturally here. So I went home, I did a video on it because I was so excited about it. And I think, when we can get people excited, again, connected, people want to be connected. They want to be understanding of their surroundings. And so I think that is really key for driving behavior change, is to get folks excited, not feeling bad, but as you said, Sofia, feeling curious and interested, and then getting them stoked that they get to have this really interesting new produce.
Yeah, that's great. I currently have a bunch of kohlrabi seedlings plants in my kitchen because I love kohlrabi and nobody grows it here. Why is it not here? It's delicious.
And it's just fun to say.
Right.
Kohlrabi.
Right. Kohlrabi. So I have a bunch of little plants growing in my kitchen right now, and I'm watering them, every day. But
I can't wait to hear how that goes.
I know. And I'm so excited. I'm like ready for the weather to get warmer and stay a little warmer so I can get them out in the planter boxes that I now have. So.
And Sofia, I'm curious if are there vegetables or fruits or things in Thailand that we have never heard of that you've discovered since you've been moving there, since you've moved there?
For sure. So many, actually. And to me, it's very interesting to see that there is some government interest in it as well. Right now, after COVID, the government started to put more emphasis on traditional indigenous medicine to prevent COVID from spreading. So things like finger root, ginger, these things that are very antioxidant, anti-inflammation, to take them in your tea, just to make sure that your immune system is very strong. The government is very into it, but also people are very into it right now because they're starting to trust the traditional medicine a bit more as a prevention to COVID in general, but many other illnesses. And I think to me, that's been the most eye-opening thing because I used to think as an Italian, food is very important, but I didn't think about food in terms of medicine,
Mm-hmm.
And this is what Thailand really made me rethink. Like, okay, herbs are nice and good, and you can learn about all different herbs, okra, and like all these different veggies, and then you can really use them also to make yourself feel better and your immune system stronger. Yeah.
Boy, I wish the same thing would happen here in the States because I think we've missed a huge opportunity to try to get people understanding the role that food can play on making their immune system more resilient. I'm not saying that this is a cure for COVID or a
Right.
definitive preventive measure, but we do know that when we eat the foods that support our immune function, or when we minimize the foods that don't support our immune system or suppress our immune system, that has an impact on our resilience and our susceptibility to a variety of different infections and illnesses. So yes, food can truly be the information that our body needs to balance itself immune wise.
Do you think that
Yeah.
that growing things locally or eating local foods is better for the microbiome? Does it have any impact? I mean, I'm trying to make a connection here between like the place that you live, the food that you eat, and the microbiome that's in your body. Is there some kind of through line there, or are we all just so moved from where we might have originated that it doesn't really matter?
I believe there is some research around that, around the benefits of being, again, once again, in concert with nature, right? With the microorganisms that are in the soil. They're very, very similar to the makeup of our microbiome as well. They're very similar families and species of microorganisms that are in the soil. And so I would imagine that yes, eating foods that are local are going to amplify and augment the ability of our own microbiome to function as it should, which is making our immune system more resilient, and a variety of other influences that it has on our overall health in so many different ways.
Yeah. And actually, another thing that I found very interesting in Thailand, and I wanted Mary's opinion on it as well, is fermentation. Because fermented foods, it's not only the value added that it brings to the food value chain, because you can use, like, instead of food waste, if you have food surplus, you can use and do fermented, and then you extend kind of the life of that product. But it's also what it does to your body and the gut, and also the community, because I've seen a lot of community using fermented pineapple to treat the wastewater. So wastewater treatment with fermented pineapple and some leaves and some composted material. So it's very interesting to see how you can use food waste in a circular way, right? It's kind of a circular economic model where every resource is used until the very end of life. And when it's the end of life stage, you kind of repurpose it and use it in another way. And to me, it's very interesting to see what it does, to your own immune system, but also the, let's call it, immune system of the community. Like, the community can really become more resilient because it has this different way of looking at food waste as like food treasure in a way.
Yeah, there's a wonderful new term out there that I've just started hearing called upcycling. So instead of recycling, this is this idea of exactly what you just said, Sophia, which is taking what would normally be thrown away, maybe the husks of something or maybe the peels of something, and actually utilizing them to create. Gosh, I was just looking at a website yesterday about this. I can't even remember what the things were, that sort of these brilliant ideas about not wasting food, and in fact, not only not wasting it, but turning it into some other fabulous product that is also completely useful, whether it's an edible thing or whether it's about this idea of cleaning water or whatever it was that you mentioned with the pineapple. I mean, that's incredible. And that idea of circular economy, circular food economy, that is going to be more and more necessary. And I really hope people will begin to understand the necessity of that as well.
Yeah, especially as urgent as it seems to be at this point in humanity. So one last question before we wrap up, because I want to respect everybody's time, but this has been such a great conversation. I hope we can do this again. But I consider myself a very food privileged person, right? I have access to a lot of very healthy food and a lot of very unhealthy food, and the resources to purchase it, and a clean place to store it, and a refrigerator and a kitchen and all those things. So what do you want every food privileged person like myself to know about food sustainability, food equity, food justice?
This is a really big question, and I think there isn't one definitive answer, but I'm going to give it a shot.
Okay.
Which is going to be about individualizing it to each person. And I think we can ask ourselves the question, which is, what is your sphere of influence? it might just be your own personal habits, right? Or it might be your family, or it might be your community, or it might be your voice in the local food system, or your local city council, or maybe you work with an organization that has larger influence that can actually, make decisions that can have a stronger impact. So I think asking people what is their sphere of influence and meeting yourself where you are at and knowing whatever it is that you do, even if it's just about, hey, I'm going to connect with nature, hey, I'm going to just have a meal where I really feel like I know where my food came from. Maybe that's this place that someone can start. And then speaking up, speaking out, whether that's in writing, in calls, in conversation, or in activist action with your local or state senators or other political advisors nearby. So that would be, I think, where I would say to go.
That's great. I love that answer.
It's a good one. Okay, yeah. From my side, I agree with Mary. I think from my side, it would be go to the farm. At least once in your life, go to the farm. It's as simple as that. And I think once is already enough to reconnect with nature, because then you really understand. So get your hands dirty or not, or just look at the farmers, look at what they're doing and ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions, because they're the best, like seriously. And I'm getting a PhD out of this, but they're the best teachers. They are. I went to the field and I was like, oh my God, you guys are teaching me so much. And they told me, no, you're the expert. And I was like, no, you guys are the experts. So we were like fighting, but they really are. They've been doing it for a while and they know best because they observe nature. So as you said, it's like, nature can teach us a lot, and they've been learning a lot. And we as urban consumers or very privileged folks are kind of disconnected, and we just have to go back and really reconnect, understand again, become more intuitive in the way that we purchase and we consume food, and not overthink about it also too much, because sometimes it's very simple, I think.
Lovely. Mary, Sofia, thank you so much. This has been an absolutely wonderful, delicious conversation. I'm thrilled to have you both talking to me from Thailand. And Mary, you're here in Seattle?
I am.
You are. For 5 minutes until you're off to the next thing that you do. Thank you both so much. This has just been an invaluable conversation, and I've really enjoyed it.
Thanks for creating a platform where we can have these kinds of conversations, Shanna. It's really special.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you again to my guests, Mary Purdy and Sofia Cavalleri, for coming on the podcast to talk about sustainability, food, health, nutrition, equity, and justice. Don't forget, April 22nd is Earth Day. So get out and plant a tree or recycle a thing or compost something else. Whatever it is that you have bandwidth to do, make sure you do it that day and then carry on forward. If you think a podcast might support your business or organization, you can sign up for a 45-minute free consultation and we'll take you through whether or not a podcast is right for you and how to get started. Audiotocracy.com. Bless you. That was my dog sneezing. Poor little croak, I set up her nose.